Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. My name's Amy, also known as Knee Knits here on YouTube and Instagram. I talk about all things knitting and yarn. This is my second podcast, so let's get started. So it's been about 3 weeks since I filmed my first podcast. I went through some finished objects, talked about some projects that I have going on, and also talked about some yarn that I had acquired. And this month we got the same thing. We got some finished objects to share that I started last podcast. We have some new progress pieces and no new yarn. But I'm going to talk a little bit about that and how I'm trying to save some money from buying knitting supplies. But yeah, so we'll start with what I'm wearing. Since I haven't podcasted that much before, I kind of have like a backlog of knit sweaters to share, so pretty excited to wear this one. I actually made this last year. I started it last September, but then it kind of took a while to finish. I think I finished it in late winter around March, so earlier this year in March, so I didn't really get to wear it much because it got warm, but as soon as fall hit here in Massachusetts where I live, I immediately grabbed this, especially because it's like the perfect pumpkin spice color. So this is the Oslo Sweater by Petite Knit, and I knit it in the yarn that she suggests for the pattern, which is Sewek DK is the yarn brand, and the yarn is called Taupe, and it's kind of a chainette wool, and this is the color 17. They don't have color names, but you can see it's sort of like an orangey rust color. And then I paired it with Knitting for Olive soft silk mohair in the color rust. So the Sewek chainette yarn, which is the main base, pretty orangey. Orange is not my color normally. I don't really gravitate towards warm tones. I'm definitely a cool toned girl. So this orangey color, I wanted to pair it with the rust, which is more of like a red mohair color to sort of mellow out the orange. And I really like how it turned out. The fabric is so nice. Like, I really like this sweater. I'll try and show you guys close up. But it's got this great halo, and because it's chainette, it's very light. Like, holding the sweater, it's very light but super warm and fluffy. I love how much positive ease it has. I know the Oslo Sweater, she's sort of known for this pattern because of the nice puffy collar, and I thought the collar was a great addition. It's what drew me to the pattern originally as well. So I have this nice sort of folded 1x1 rib collar that goes all the way around. This is a drop shoulder sweater construction. So you start with the back. It's got these great angled increases along the back shoulder line, and then you pick up the sleeves at the end. So yeah, I finished it off with tubular bind off in all of the places. So great sweater. I am interested in knitting it again in sort of a non-chainette yarn. I think it would definitely give a totally different look with, a classic spun wool, maybe without mohair even. So I'm not one to repeat patterns. I've never actually knit the same pattern twice. Of course, not including hats that I sell in my shop, but in terms of sweaters and garments, I've never knit the same pattern more than once. Although this one, I've seen people knit it in more spun yarns without mohair, and I like the look of it. So I'll keep that in mind when maybe I need another project. But I got a lot of other projects going on, so a second Oslo sweater isn't in the queue anytime soon. But we'll talk about some finished objects that I finished this month. And if you watch my first podcast, I talked a lot about my first completed pair of socks, or I was trying to complete my first pair of socks. I've had a couple of failed attempts at socks. I just never really found a desire to knit socks, and I know sock knitting is like this whole community within knitters. Like, people love knitting socks. There's a whole world of yarns for socks and, yarns of the month and sock clubs and all that. So I tried again to knit some socks, and we were successful. So I have here my first pair of knit socks. This pattern is the Vanilla Socks on 9-inch circulars by the Crazy Sock Lady. It's a free YouTube pattern, so I just followed along with the YouTube tutorial. I knit them using 9-inch circular needles, and for me that was the secret for getting the socks done, because I like how on circulars you can just keep knitting. You don't have to like swap hands or move the needle around a lot like with DPNs or Magic Loop. So I was so excited to finish these. And the big motivator also, along with the 9-inch circulars, was this yarn. And I mentioned the yarn briefly in the first podcast, and then I realized that I didn't really talk a lot about it. So apologies for that. So I'm going to talk about the yarn now. So the yarn I used, and I have the ball here. This is Wonderland Yarns, and it is a hand-dyed sock yarn. It's called Marianne is the sock yarn line. It's an 85% fine superwash merino wool and a 15% nylon yarn, which is a pretty standard yarn blend for socks. You know, they have the superwash merino because a lot of people do like to wash their socks in the washing machine instead of hand washing them, and the nylon gives it that extra strength that the socks will need because it does get a lot of wear, you know, around the toes and around the heels. So this yarn, it was just gorgeous, and it was giving me so many fall vibes. I love going along with the seasons, as you can see, wearing the orange sweater and this really nice sort of berry red colored sock yarn. And I really like how it came out in the socks. There's no major pooling, like the way the variegation of the colors came out on the socks is just lovely. I wouldn't change anything about these socks. So I've already worn them. I did block them. I used sock blockers that I got during my Greater Boston yarn crawl. So these are metal sock blockers, and it's definitely transformed the socks. You know, they look a little wonky when you take them off the needles, but I soaked them in my wool wash, and then I stretched them onto the forms and then had them air dry. They dried really quickly, maybe in like a day or two. And yeah, I've actually already worn these socks a couple times around my house because they're super warm. They're super thick too, like compared to store-bought or commercially made socks. These are like very nice. So I see the appeal, and knowing that they're 85% wool, it just seems like a great winter staple. So I guess you can call me a sock knitter now. I feel like it's kind of dangerous because now I have a use for all these gorgeous hand-dyed yarns that I've seen. I know there's a whole bunch of small businesses and knitters and other crafters who hand-dye their own yarn and love looking at them. Have never really seen a purpose for them for me because for me, wearing sweaters, I tend to like more neutrals, although these colors are so pretty, and now I'm like, wow, well, I can just make a ton of socks with these. So very excited about the concept of being a sock knitter. And I actually did wash these in the washing machine as well, so I've worn them twice. And the second time I stuck them in the washing machine on Cold Delicate with a couple other dark items just in case the dye ran, and they came out great. You know, I've never actually washed a knit in the washing machine for fears of felting, even if the yarn does advertise as superwash, but I wanted to try it out with the socks because I just don't see myself hand washing socks every time I wear them. So very excited to learn that they can successfully be machine washed. So yeah, those are my first finished objects of the month. I already have some more sock yarn that I bought. It's on queue for another pair. I'm thinking of making a pair for my husband, and so you'll see those soon. Let's see. So the next finished object that I have, oh yes, this is a good one. This is my second and last finished object of the month. I had started it, I want to say 1.5 months ago, and I was super excited for this one to be done because I was just excited to wear it. I think it's super cute. It seems like a super cute pattern. So this is my Polo Sweater. All right. This was a labor of love. This was made on 4mm needles with Lion Brand Superwash Merino wool from their Lion Brand collection yarn. The pattern is by Caitlin Barthold, also known as Originally Lovely on Instagram, and she has a blog. And it's actually a free pattern. I actually bought the kit from Lion Brand, so I was sent the PDF version of the pattern, which I use. But if you want the pattern, it's actually free on her website, which is awesome. I feel like there are not a lot of knit polo patterns out there, and I really wanted like a long sleeve polo sweater. So now I have one. Very exciting. Yeah, this one took a while on 4mm needles. I felt like, you know, knitting the yoke before I joined in the round was just taking forever. And the yarn, I'll talk about the yarn in a little bit, but the yarn was interesting to work with. So it was one of those things where I was loving it come out on the needles, but I also was really eager to have it be finished so I could wear it. So a lot of people talk about process knitting versus project knitting, and some projects for people are process knitting projects, meaning they're enjoying knitting it because the process of knitting it is really exciting to them. It's like therapeutic, relaxing, and the product might not be their priority. Whereas some other projects people call as projects where the priority is having the finished object and saying like, yeah, I have this and now I can wear it. And for this one, it was definitely more of a project knit for me. I was really excited to have this in my wardrobe. When I was actually knitting it, I did enjoy knitting it. It's not that I disliked knitting it, but the yarn was tricky. So I used the superwash merino wool from Lion brand, and it's very stretchy. I don't know if you can guys see. Like, it has a lot of stretch, more so than normal wools, and I think that comes with the superwashing process. So I find when you have yarns that are very stretchy, it's difficult to keep an even tension, because sometimes you'll stretch the yarn and it'll stretch out as you're making the stitch, or you'll loosen up and the stitches will look uneven as you're knitting it. And I felt like that was happening with this pattern as I was knitting it. My tension didn't really look too even. I was like, oh, I hope this blocks out. I also knit left-handed, so I wrapped my yarn like the opposite direction that it was spun. I found that it undid itself pretty often on my needles, so it was a little splitty. Like, I feel like the fibers aren't too tightly wound, so you can see it sort of like comes apart pretty easily. So as I was knitting it, I was definitely thinking to myself, I don't know if I would use this yarn again. It was a great deal because I got it on sale from the Lion brand website. This only took 4 balls of the yarn for the size that I made. I think I made a size small. And I was thinking, I don't know if I'll buy this yarn again. I didn't really like knitting with it until I blocked it. And when I started the pattern and was reading through it, the pattern has multiple warnings about how much this yarn grows when it's blocked and how important it is to do a gauge swatch, and why they add faux seams at the end, which I'll also talk about. So I was very aware of like, oh, this is definitely going to grow when I block it. Maybe it'll even itself out a lot. And it did. And I did do a gauge swatch, so I was prepared for it to grow because I had seen how much the gauge swatch grew. But yeah, so once I blocked this, all of the stitches and the yarn sort of bloomed, and it really evened itself out. Like, you can see there's not a lot of unevenness with the stitches. It definitely came to life after blocking, and it grew a ton. Like, I think I knit the sleeves to be about to here, and when I wear the sweater, they definitely come to here. It's got this great drape too, like you can see as I'm waving it around. It's like very flowy. It is a good length. It hits like at my hips, and I made sure it was long enough because I have found with a lot of my past knitting projects that they're too cropped. Like, I've always knit the body first, usually have followed the pattern directions for body length, and then moved on to the sleeves. And then I finish the sweater, and then I try it on, and it's just a little too cropped. Maybe it hits right at the waistline or right where high-waisted jeans hit on me. And for this sweater, I did not want it to be too cropped. And the pattern does say that this is a cropped design, so to make sure I had enough yarn to make it long enough. So I actually did the yoke, and then I went ahead and did the collar because it didn't look good without the collar. So I really wanted to see how it looked with the collar. So the collar was second. I connected it in the round and then finished off whatever ball of yarn I was on at that point, and then I went to the sleeves. And I finished the sleeves and then went back to the body and then knit the body until the end. And I was making sure to use up all the yarn because I don't really have any plans for this leftover yarn. And I kind of played yarn chicken. I didn't realize how much I was knitting the body until I was doing the ribbing at the bottom. And I ended up doing one less round of ribbing at the bottom because I was like, oh, I don't know if I have enough yarn to do one more round and the tubular bind off and do the faux seams. So this is literally all I have left from the yarn. So I guess that's a good project in a way, using up all the resources, but at the same time, I'm glad I didn't run out, and I'm glad I didn't have to undo the ribbing and shorten the body just to have enough yarn to finish. Now let's talk about faux seams. So I know a lot of knitters don't like seaming garments, and I'm on that train too. I don't really like having to knit something and then, if you're all done knitting, you're technically not done with the project because then you have to sew it together. But it is true that seams help the integrity of your knitwear because the seams don't have the same amount of stretch that the knit stitch has. So it is important, depending on the type of yarn you're using and the type of project, to either be aware that your sweater will grow and stretch over time, or if it's a yarn like this, superwash merino, which is famous for really growing and stretching over time, that adding faux seams or adding real seams will help prevent it from stretching out into a shape that you might not want to wear. So this pattern, when you did the body, it had you do a garter stitch row right under the armpit on each side. And after it was blocked, so this is after it grew in size, you were to go back with a crochet hook and go into the garter stitch bumps and create sort of like a chain stitch along those garter stitch bumps. And I'll try and show you up close. So you can see where the chain stitch is. It's twice as big as the regular stitches because you do one chain stitch for every 2 knit stitches. So from afar it's pretty invisible, but the chain stitch is actually a lot tighter than the knit stitch, and it's actually not going to stretch as much. So by adding that in both under the armpits and along the whole seam of the sleeve, you're going to get some structural integrity that you might not otherwise have with your sweater over time. I've seen it in a lot of patterns that I haven't made. This is the first time I actually did the faux seams. It was tricky because you have to stick the crochet hook sort of into the fabric, grab the yarn, and then pull it through. But when you have like an enclosed sleeve, it's difficult to grab the yarn on your crochet hook when your crochet hook is inside the sleeve. So it was kind of tedious. I actually did it just last night, and I had put it aside thinking, okay, like before I go to sleep, I'm just gonna quickly put in the faux seams and then this project will be done. And then like 2 hours later, I was finally cutting the ends of my last faux seam, and I was like, oh, that was a lot of work. But I can tell that this is like a stretchy fabric and it's gonna grow over time, so I'm glad I added the faux seams. And she does have a very nice picture tutorial on her blog, The Pattern Designer, for how to do them. I read on Ravelry a lot of other people who did the project kind of ignored the faux seams, and it's hard to tell if they are helpful or not. This is the kind of thing I'm going to have to see over time if this helps with stretching, maybe compare it to my other projects that don't have the faux seams. And yeah, so overall, this polo sweater was a lot of fun. I really like this pattern. I feel like it's an underrated pattern. There's a lot going on here. I really like the V-neck placket. Oh, I'll talk about the placket a little bit. So I actually cut in half this length of the V-neck. I'm not a huge fan of V-necks. I'm usually a crew neck girl, and I like things sort of cut higher up. And the pattern, I think, calls for, well, I did half of what the pattern calls for. So I actually joined in the round halfway through these increases. I think the pattern wanted you to keep going until the end of the raglan yoke and then connect in the round, so the V-neck would be at the same level as the underarm. And I knew that was going to be too large for me, so I just did half connected in the round and then continued the raglan as normal. Another cool thing about this pattern is that the raglan is called a compound raglan, so the increases that you do for the sleeves and the back and the front are actually at a different rate of each other. So it just helps with the shaping a little bit. One thing that I would recommend for this pattern is to maybe add some short row shaping to the back neck. So there's no short row shaping in this pattern, and short row shaping really helps bring up the neck a little bit, just the way the human body is structured. You know, the back of your neck is sort of raised a little bit, so a lot of patterns will have short rows to help mimic that natural shape, and it just brings the back collar higher than the front. And this one had none of that, but I think it would fit just a little bit better if it did. So, but yeah, this was a really nice pattern. I really like the fabric after it's been washed. It's so soft and smooth. I am a little worried about pilling reviews for this yarn. The only negative comments on the reviews for this yarn is that it does pill. So I expect to see some pilling. There already is some on the fabric, and this is like brand new, of course, so we'll see. We'll see how this wears. I think in the future I'm going to film a video that's like, oh, my knits over time, to sort of see how things wear, how they pill, how they've stretched. All right, now we'll get into my whips, my works in progress. So I have two to share. One of them I talked about in my first podcast. I'm looking at it over here, so let me grab it. So this is the beginnings of my oversized seasons cardigan by the knitwear designer known as Ozetta. And this is a half fisherman's rib cardigan. And I've started the yoke. It's pretty cool pattern construction. You actually start the neckband, you pick up stitches along it, and then you knit the neckband with the rest of the sweater, and it becomes the button band. And it's a pretty cool concept because when I'm all done knitting this cardigan, I won't have to go back and add a button band. It'll already be sort of incorporated in the sweater, and I'm very excited for this one. I'm knitting it with the Lana Grossa Cool Merino right here. So this is a chainette yarn. It is 90% merino wool and 10% polyamide. So I actually got this on sale at my local yarn store in a sweater quantity, so that was kind of a steal. This is the color gray. It's very light, and it has a little bit of variegation in the color. You can see it's not like a flat gray. It has a little bit of white speckling in darker areas. So I am really excited for this cardigan. I feel like these cardigans, if you can picture sort of the whole all over half fisherman's rib pattern going down, and it has a slight V-neck finishing with big buttons. It's kind of like a common cardigan pattern being sold commercially now, so I'm very excited to have one that I said I made on my own, and I'm just trying it on to show you the fit so far because it is half fisherman's rib. It is growing very slowly. I actually just finished my first ball of yarn from this, so I have to add the second ball of yarn, and I think I'm about halfway through the raglan increases. I am a little concerned about how it's going to fit because it doesn't look like I'm halfway through the raglan increases. You know, you have to visualize this has got to reach all the way to my underarm, which is about here, and I know blocking will help stretch it out a little bit. And my gauge swatch was pretty close to what the pattern calls for, but we'll see as I get to the end of the raglan increases how it actually looks like it's going to fit. I may have to add a few just in case it just seems like it's not going to fit at my underarms. But yeah, this is really nice yarn, really nice pattern so far. The beginning with this band was definitely a little tricky, definitely like stretching my knitting brain to make sure I could get it correctly, but I'll just give you a little close-up of the knitting so far. I just love that half fisherman's rib look. It does kind of look like brioche, but it's not. I've never actually knit brioche. It's on my list eventually. I feel like it kind of scares me because people say it's difficult, although maybe that's just people talking. I feel like I'm up for the challenge, but until then I'll do this half fisherman's rib as a sub. The inside is pretty cool. You know, different patterns will use half fisherman's ribs in different ways. So some patterns will use half fisherman's rib and use this as the right side. Other patterns like this one will use this side as the right side. So yeah, there's my oversized seasons cardigan. She does have two seasons cardigan patterns. One of them is called the oversized, and one of them is just called the seasons cardigan. I don't really know the big difference besides the gauge and maybe the fit. I think the oversized one has a little bit more ease built into it, and it is made with larger needles. This is knit on 5mm, and I don't know the needles for the other one, but she also has matching like seasons sweaters, I believe. So if you like the look of this half fisherman's rib, I would definitely recommend to check out her patterns. So, yeah, that's my first work in progress. This one I started it a while ago and then put it down and then picked up some other stuff. So my next work in progress that I actually started this week, but I'm kind of ripping through it pretty quickly. I didn't mean to say rip, but I mean I'm going through it pretty quickly because I'm excited to wear it. This is also, I think, leaning more of a project than a process project because I'm like very excited to wear it. But it's been fun so far. So this is the Friday Slipover V-neck by Petite Knit. So this is a broken rib V-neck sweater vest. She has a lot of things in her sort of Friday line that are made from this broken rib. And so this is actually the back panel. I just started the front right, so you can imagine this will sort of go on my back and has these really nice increases. I just love how Petite Knit designs, like her increases and shaping. It just looks so nice. Try and show this to you guys. So yeah, I'm knitting this with Sandnes Garn Sunday yarn paired with a Mohair substitute. I'm using Suri alpaca. The pattern calls for any sort of silk mohair, but this is the combo of yarn I'm using, and I say this is a Mohair substitute because there's actually no mohair in this. This is the Plymouth yarn Suri Stratus, and I'll talk a little bit about this yarn here. So this is the ball of yarn. It is, let me find the fiber content. It's 68% Suri alpaca and 32% nylon. And I bought this, I was looking for mohair for the pattern. I didn't intend to buy Suri alpaca, but when I was at my local yarn store and I grabbed the Sunday in the light beige that I wanted, I was looking for a matching mohair and they just didn't have any beige mohairs. They had a lot of bright colors, not a lot of neutrals. So this was the only sort of mohair-esque yarn that they had that actually matched this yarn. So I decided to go with this. It was only $7 US, so I would say it's a good sort of more affordable substitute for mohair, and there are a lot of differences I've noticed. You can see the fibers coming off of it. It's like pretty fuzzy. And it is a nylon base instead of a silk base that a lot of other silk mohairs are known for. So there's no sort of sheen or shine with this yarn. I actually pulled out a ball of my Knitting for Olive soft silk mohair to compare it with, and I only have one ball of this in my stash, which is why I didn't use it for the vest, because the vest needs 3. So this is Knitting for Olive soft silk mohair in the color Mushroom Rose. And I absolutely love this yarn. It's such a joy to work with when you pair it with fingering weight wool. And I made the April cardigan using this, which has not yet made an appearance on my podcast, but I will show it to you someday. So you can see the silk mohair here. And this is the Suri alpaca with nylon. So I'll just hold them up side by side. And you can see that the Knitting for Olive mohair has a little bit of shine to it. That silk core is like naturally shiny. And this is a little bit more dull. You can also see the fuzz on the alpaca is a lot bigger than the fuzz on the mohair. Also just feeling it, this feels a little bit more rough or rustic to the touch, where this is more of a luxurious, soft feeling. And as I'm knitting with it, I can tell the differences immensely between real mohair and the alpaca. It's just a different look. I like it. I'm not saying I don't like it, but I think I see why people use mohair in the knitting instead of Suri alpaca. I'm definitely going to enjoy this vest when it's done, but I don't think I would buy the alpaca substitute again. it just feels a little bit rough. And I did do a gauge swatch. So this is washed in wool wash, and it did get a little bit softer, but again, it's not like the softest ever. And yeah, oh, I also found that this will like stretch and break. Like I had a small knot because the fuzz, it's pretty easy to get knotted, and I was trying to undo the knot and it actually like ripped because it has like stretch to it and it broke. So I didn't really like that. But yeah, this is my Friday Slipover v-neck in progress. I feel like I'm gonna finish this pretty quickly. It's been a lot of fun to knit, and I know in Petite Knits sample pattern or sample photos, she actually uses a contrasting mohair color for the body and then uses a matching mohair color for the trim, like the V neckline and the arms. I'm actually not going to do that, so this is all going to be one color, all going to be knit in this fabric, so can't wait to see how it comes out. It looks a little small right now, but that's because the broken rib sort of shrinks up on itself as it's knit, but it will stretch out to fit me, hopefully. The gauge swatch was good, so I'm putting all my faith in that. But yeah, as I'm knitting it, I'm like, oh, this is a tiny vest. Okay, so no yarn acquisitions this month, which is good, because if you saw my last video, the Greater Boston Yarn Crawl and Yarn Haul, I had gotten a lot of yarn that I wasn't expecting to buy. So I haven't bought anything since then, which is good. You know, I don't need more yarn for my stash. I got a lot going on there. Definitely trying to work on, you know, trimming it down, knitting projects with it. Christmas is coming up, so I'm hoping to knit a few gifts with a lot of the yarn that I have, because I have a lot of one-off balls of yarn that, you know, it's not a sweater quantity, but one ball of yarn is usually enough to make a hat. So I'd love to make more beanies for people, for gifts, as well as more socks. I have some sock yarn that I'm excited to knit some socks with. And yeah, one thing I did buy, it hasn't arrived yet, but I finally splurged on a yarn Swift from Knit Picks. They had a small sale, so it was a little bit discounted. I ordered it a couple weeks ago. I'm still waiting for it to arrive, but because I'm buying more yarn that is sold in hanks, I figured it was time to get a Swift to make my yarn winding life a little bit easier. I already own a yarn ball winder that I got ages ago. I think I got it when I was in middle school from, I don't even remember where it was from, but it's still kicking. It's just the plastic, you know, you screw it onto the table ledge and it'll wind the ball for you. So I'm excited to pair that with my new Swift and hopefully wind up some hanks of yarn, especially the ones I just got. I got this really nice skein of sock yarn from East Coast Yarn Company. I talked about it in my last video. And I'm ready to get started on my next pair of socks, but I need to wait for that Swift to come in so I can wind it. For this sock ball here, it came in a hank, and I actually put it on this office chair and, you know, wound it off of the office chair. It took way too long. It was pretty tedious, so I'm not going to do that again. But yeah, I'm kind of on a yarn ban until Christmas. I'm telling myself until Christmas. We'll see if I can last that long, but I have a lot of projects queued up, lots of yarn in my stash, so there's no need to buy more. I also am kind of in a pattern ban buying mood. There are a lot of things that I want to buy and sort of add to my pattern library, and I feel like it's tempting to just add to cart a lot of different patterns because patterns usually sell for less than $10 US, and in my mind, compared to everything else we buy on a daily basis, you know, food and rent and all that stuff, you know, $10 seems very insignificant, so it's easy to just add to cart, lots of patterns, but I don't know, it adds up over time, and I'm trying to minimize my yarn and knitting spending as I have a stockpile already, so we'll see. But thank you guys for joining in. I appreciate you guys watching my channel, listening to me talk about my knitting. It's very fun for me to share what I'm working on and what interests me with my projects. So if you like my content, I would love for you guys to subscribe and comment. You know, let me know that you're watching. I love replying to you guys and hearing what you guys have to say. My links for my Ravelry page and my Instagram and Etsy are all below in the description, as well as everything that I talked about today, you know, patterns, yarn, and yeah, if you guys want to follow me on Instagram as well, I post a lot of content there, you know, daily posts of what I'm knitting, what I have posted in my Etsy shop, so would love to see you guys there. Thank you all for watching. Happy knitting.